Trump tried to silence Jasmine Crockett with a harsh insult, but her response, one simple question, stopped the entire room in its tracks. "Tell me, Ivanka, is she your daughter or your wife?" The year was 2025. America wasn't just divided, it felt split in half. Conversations at family tables, arguments in workplaces, and every headline on every screen carried the same weight. People weren't simply disagreeing anymore. They were choosing sides, and the distance between those sides had grown wider than ever. At the center of that tension stood one man, President Donald Trump. Trump was no longer viewed as just another politician. By this point, he had become a larger-than-life figure, admired by millions and opposed just as fiercely by millions more. Every word he spoke moved through the country like a shockwave. Supporters believed he was the fighter the nation needed. Critics braced themselves because his speeches often came with a sharp remark, an insult, or an attack aimed at them. This wasn't ordinary politics anymore. It was politics at a breaking point. But the truth about power is simple. No matter how strong or loud it becomes, someone always steps up to challenge it. And one of those rising challengers was becoming harder and harder for the country to ignore. Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett wasn't a well-known public figure in the beginning. She didn't come from extreme wealth or political influence. She built her reputation slowly through long nights, tough battles, and a firm refusal to let her voice be pushed aside. She was sharp, outspoken, and determined. She practiced law, fought for justice, and served in Congress, where she didn't hesitate to ask direct and uncomfortable questions. People called her bold. Others said she took risks. But one thing was clear. She was not afraid of Donald Trump. And in 2025, that made her a serious threat. Now imagine the setting. A large hall filled with many of the country's most influential figures. Politicians, business leaders, media personalities. All gathered for an event planned down to the smallest detail. It was the kind of evening where people dressed well, where handshakes were strategic, and where cameras were positioned perfectly. It was supposed to be a night to display power, not challenge it. Yet into that room walked Jasmine Crockett, already recognized as a strong voice of opposition. And across from her stood President Trump, commanding the space as he had many times before. Trump knew how to work a crowd. He knew how to make cameras focus on him. He knew how to entertain, provoke, or unsettle with just a few words. He was confident. Why wouldn't he be? For years, insults had been one of his most effective tools. When he attacked, opponents often stumbled and the audience responded. But that night would not follow the old pattern. A few rows away sat Jasmine Crockett, prepared, alert, and not easily shaken. She didn't shrink under pressure. If anything, she seemed energized by it. As the event began, the room carried a quiet tension. People kept glancing at both Trump and Crockett, waiting for the moment they would clash. Consider the situation: a divided nation, a president known for using sharp language, and a rising leader refusing to step aside. What happens when they face each other in the same room? The tension grew thicker. Whispers moved across the crowd. Would Trump address her? Would Crockett respond? Would the event stay calm, or become a moment people would talk about for years? Trump eventually stepped onto the stage. He spoke with confidence, his voice strong as it reached every corner of the hall. He talked about his plans, accomplishments, and critics. The audience reacted politely. It was typical Trump, controlling the atmosphere around him. Then his attention shifted. His eyes met Jasmine Crockett's. And the mood of the room changed immediately. People leaned forward. They knew what would come next. Trump never avoided a confrontation, and Crockett was someone who challenged the authority he valued. Then came the insult, delivered in a firm and intentional tone. "You're just a loudmouth who thrives on drama. Maybe you should worry less about politics and more about fixing your own mess." The words cut sharply through the air. A heavy silence followed. No one moved. Even the cameras seemed to pause. This wasn't casual disrespect. It was meant to embarrass her in front of the country's most influential people and those watching from home. Trump wasn't just criticizing her. He was sending a message. This is my space, not yours. Reactions varied across the hall. Some people waited to see if Crockett would break under pressure. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing that Trump had pushed the line. A few simply watched her closely, curious about her next move. The moment was tense. Would she react with anger? Stay silent? Laugh it off? Trump's tactics were familiar. Insults designed to unsettle, to throw opponents off balance. If they lost composure, he gained the upper hand. And this insult was aimed directly at her credibility. Labeling her as merely loud, suggesting she was unqualified, undermining her in a single quick sentence. Many had struggled to recover from moments like this. But Jasmine Crockett was not like them. The silence stretched. People waited. Even Trump watched, expecting her to respond in a way he could easily dismiss. But instead of shrinking, Jasmine lifted her shoulders and held her position. She didn't rush. She didn't let emotion control her. She allowed the weight of the moment to settle so that when she finally spoke, the room would listen. Before we reach a reply, think about this. How often has a single insult changed the direction of a conversation? How often has a cutting line been enough to silence someone and show who holds power? That was Trump's goal, to strike hard enough that Jasmine would not recover. But instead of being overwhelmed, Crockett was preparing to shift the moment completely. In that brief pause, the stage no longer belonged to just Trump. It belonged to both of them. And what happened next would determine who truly held control. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were seconds away from seeing one of the most unexpected turnarounds in modern politics. Trump believed his words were the final blow. But Jasmine Crockett was only beginning. The room remained still. Trump's insult hung in the air, full of tension. For several seconds, no one spoke. People held their breath, waiting for her reaction. At the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett remained steady. Trump had used this tactic many times. Strike hard, watch the opponent struggle, and walk away confident. But this time, it didn't work. Jasmine slowly straightened. She remained calm, choosing her moment carefully. Her confidence was controlled, deliberate, and unmistakable. The spotlight turned naturally toward her. She started speaking softly but clearly, her tone steady enough to carry through the hall. Personal attacks, she said, pausing to let the words sink in, are tools of fear. They're meant to divide us, silence us, and control us. But truth and courage, those are what break those chains. The room grew quiet once more, but this silence was different. People weren't shocked now. They were listening. Jasmine had shifted the moment entirely, responding not with anger, but with clarity and purpose. She was quietly reshaping the direction of the night. It showed clearly on Trump's face. He expected outrage, a slip-up, maybe even emotion. But what he received instead was steadiness, clarity, and a voice that rose above his remark without mirroring its intensity. And just when the room believed she was done, she shifted. Her tone sharpened, her gaze fixed directly on Trump. Then came the line. "Tell me, Ivanka," she said, her voice cutting clean through the room. "Is she your daughter or your wife?" A wave of shock moved through the hall. It felt as if the air had vanished. Faces froze, heads turned toward Trump. Even supporters who usually backed him fully shifted uneasily. Because this wasn't just a question. It was aimed directly at the rumors he had long tried to suppress. Crockett didn't blink. She stood firm, letting the words settle. Trump stopped cold. For once, the man known for quick replies and fast jabs had nothing, and the silence felt heavy. The crowd struggled to process what they had heard. This wasn't an accidental phrase. It was intentional, measured, and it struck Trump where no previous remark had reached. A few people clapped awkwardly. Others looked around, eyes wide, whispering. Even the camera lingered on Trump, trying to capture the exact moment his usual control faltered. Crockett remained steady. No retreat, no softening of her words. She had used Trump's own tactic against him, and she wasn't letting the moment slip. "You came here to tear me down," she said calmly. "But what you've really done is expose yourself. Because insults don't build policy. They don't repair systems. They don't help families. They don't inspire hope. They only reveal the insecurity of the person throwing them." Her words struck hard. The night was no longer about Trump's insult. It had shifted to leadership itself. What kind of person should guide a divided country? And in that moment, it became clear to everyone that Jasmine Crockett wasn't only defending herself. She was taking command. Trump shifted in discomfort. He attempted a laugh, tried to brush it off, but the room no longer followed him. The focus had moved, and nothing he did could reclaim it. As the cameras zoomed in on his unsettled expression, one thing became obvious. The insult meant to silence Jasmine Crockett had only fueled her. The people felt it, the tension, the shift in energy, the change in control. Trump had planned to dominate, to overpower, to lead the room. Instead, Crockett reversed the entire moment with a single exchange. And the unspoken question lingered. If she could unsettle him this much in seconds, what else was she capable of? The hall now buzzed with her presence, not his. And as she stood steady, it became clear the turning point had only just begun. The instant she asked, "Tell me, Ivanka, is she your daughter or your wife?" The room seemed to fold inward. Every sound vanished. Every whisper stopped. It was the kind of silence that pressed heavily on the chest, stretching time. And under the lights and cameras, something rare happened. Donald Trump froze. For years Trump had relied on the quick retort. He always managed a line, a joke, a deflection sharp enough to shift the narrative. It was his signature strength. But this time, the reply never came. You could see it in his expression. The smirk that usually followed his comments faded. His eyes moved rapidly, searching for footing. He forced a laugh, but it sounded thin, strained, almost uneasy, and the room noticed. The change began subtly. A few lifted eyebrows. Nervous side glances. But then it grew. People who had leaned toward Trump leaned back. Others turned toward Crockett. The room's balance was shifting in real time. Jasmine didn't budge. She stayed calm, letting the weight of her question hold. Then, with careful precision, she spoke again. "You see," she said evenly, "insults don't solve problems. They don't improve schools. They don't fill tables. They don't protect freedoms. They only show fear. The fear of someone who cannot lead without tearing others down." The crowd responded, not with full applause yet, but with murmurs, nods, and rising energy. Momentum was shifting. Trump attempted to jump back in. His voice, usually forceful, now carried frustration. He leaned forward, gripping the podium, trying to regain control. He threw accusations, attempting to label Crockett as reckless or unqualified. His words came fast, almost stumbling over themselves. But the harder he pushed, the clearer it became. He was unsettled. His usual rhythm, confidence, and structure were slipping away. Crockett stayed composed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't allow his tone to drag her into shouting. She kept her delivery calm, deliberate, and precise. Every sentence landed exactly where she intended. At one point she said, "You can try to intimidate me. You can try to silence me. But what frightens you most is that I won't stop speaking the truth." This time, the audience erupted, no hesitation. Applause echoed across the hall, and with each cheer, Trump's grip weakened further. His face reddened, his gestures became frantic. He tried to shout over the noise, but it only made him appear smaller. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every moment, every forced grin, every sign of tension. Viewers weren't just hearing Crockett, they were watching Trump lose his footing. And Crockett knew it. She continued with confidence. "Leadership," she said, "isn't about being the loudest voice. It's about being the steady one. It's about supporting people rather than tearing them down." Another wave of applause swept through the hall, louder than before. Trump slammed his hand on the podium, raising his voice sharply, but the applause drowned him out. The cameras didn't follow him, they followed her. And at that point, something became unmistakably clear. The room no longer belonged to Trump. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett. She had taken it, not through shouting or retaliation, but through composure and clarity. Then came the breaking moment. Frustrated and red-faced, Trump made one more attempt to recover control. His tone grew harsher, his words aimed to portray Crockett as a threat. But no one accepted it anymore. The crowd had fully shifted. People who once cheered his lines were now applauding hers. Those who once leaned toward him now leaned away. He felt it. He recognized it. And then, in a move that stunned the hall, Trump stopped mid-sentence. His jaw tightened, his hand gripped the podium, he glared at Crockett, then at the audience, and suddenly he walked out. Gasps filled the space. The President of the United States had just left the stage, unable to regain the control he had always relied on. Cameras followed his exit, but the attention stayed on Crockett. She hadn't merely held her position. She had turned the entire room away from the most powerful figure in the country. Trump's confidence, dominance, and performance had cracked, and Jasmine Crockett was the one who cracked it. The crowd erupted again, louder than before. People stood, applauding, and Jasmine Crockett remained at the center. Calm, steady, unchanged. Trump entered believing the moment belonged to him. It became hers. And as the applause filled the hall, one truth became impossible to deny. The night Donald Trump believed he had quieted Jasmine Crockett turned out to be the night she spoke with more clarity and strength than ever before. The room was still vibrating from the exchange that had taken place. Applause moved through the hall like steady thunder. But underneath it, something deeper was forming. An awareness, a collective understanding that everyone present had witnessed a significant shift. Donald Trump, a man known for dominating any space he entered, had walked out. And Jasmine Crockett stood firm, not only as someone who had endured an attack, but as the clear winner of a moment few expected her to control. For a moment, she remained silent. She didn't rush to respond. She allowed the cheering to settle and the weight of the moment to linger. People rose to their feet, some clapping with intensity, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. When the room finally calmed, Jasmine leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was steady, carrying a firmness that made everyone lean forward. "This is not about me," she began. "This is about everyone in this country who has been told to stay quiet, to sit down, to accept being dismissed or ignored. Tonight proved that intimidation fails when we refuse to submit to it." The crowd erupted again, but Jasmine raised her hand, and the noise slowly eased. Her tone grew more serious. "Here's what you need to understand," she continued. "Power built on fear is weak. It may appear strong, it may sound loud, but when truth stands in front of it, it collapses. And that is what you saw tonight." The hall became silent once more. Not from fear, but from respect. Every word landed with weight. People weren't simply hearing a speech. They were watching someone rise into a role larger than the moment. A voice impossible to ignore. And outside the hall, her words were already spreading. Those watching from a distance would remember the night not for Trump's insult, but for how Jasmine turned it into resolve. Inside the room, she continued. She leaned in again, her gaze moving across the audience. "I want to ask you something. When you face injustice, when someone tries to take your dignity through insults or pressure, what will you do? Will you stay quiet, or will you rise?" The question lingered like a challenge. It wasn't rhetorical. It was meant for each person individually. It made everyone imagine their own response, to consider what courage meant in their daily lives. "You don't need to stand on a stage to show courage," she went on. "You don't need cameras to speak truth. Courage is refusing to be bullied at work. Courage is defending someone who cannot defend themselves. Courage is standing for what's right even when silence seems easier." Her words hit with precision, each one reaching its mark. The crowd wasn't just listening. They were absorbing it. She paused again. Slowly lifting her head, she lowered her voice with finality. "Tonight, I stood my ground. Not because I wanted a confrontation, but because silence is no longer something this country can afford. If we want to move forward, every one of us must have the courage to confront fear and break through it." The audience erupted into a standing ovation that shook the hall. People weren't only clapping. They were shouting and cheering. The room felt charged with energy. But Jasmine did not smile or bask in it. She stood firm, eyes focused, as if she understood this moment was only the start of a much larger effort. That may have been the strongest part, because while Trump walked out, his control slipping and his image shaken, Jasmine stayed. She stayed not as someone seeking attention, but as a leader demonstrating what steady courage looks like. The night would be remembered not just for the clash, or the insult, or the walkout. It would be remembered because Jasmine Crockett turned an attempt to silence her into a message impossible to overlook. And the question she left hanging still remains long after the applause faded and the cameras stopped. What would you do in her position? Would pressure make you fold? Would insults quiet your voice? Or would you stand firm and speak truth regardless of the cost? The truth is, most of us will never confront a president on national television. But each of us will face a moment when fear pushes us to stay silent. A moment when injustice challenges our willingness to speak. And in those moments, Jasmine's example echoes quietly. Stand tall, speak truth, and refuse to bow to fear. That is the real strength of her message. Not a political win, not a dramatic exchange, but a reminder that courage, steady and honest, can create real change. And as the lights dimmed and people stepped out into the night, one thing was unmistakable. This was more than a clash between two individuals. It was proof that when courage meets fear, truth ends up with the final word. Jasmine remained calm and unwavering, letting the meaning behind her words settle. Then, with deliberate timing, she continued. "You see," she said, her voice controlled, "insults don't fix problems. They don't improve schools. They don't put food on the table. They don't protect freedoms. They only reveal fear. Fear from someone who cannot lead without tearing others down." The crowd reacted, not yet with full applause, but with a growing wave of energy and agreement. The dynamic in the room was shifting. Trump attempted to reassert himself. His voice, typically forceful, now carried frustration. He leaned forward, gripping the podium, trying to reclaim authority. He launched accusations, labeling Crockett as reckless and unfit. His pace quickened, his words sharper, nearly stumbling over each other. But the more he pushed, the clearer it became that he was unsettled. The confidence and rhythm he relied on were slipping. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, remained composed. She did not raise her voice. She did not respond with anger. Instead, she stayed calm and controlled. Her words were concise and intentional. At one point she said, "You can try to intimidate me. You can try to quiet me. But what bothers you most is that I will not stop telling the truth." This time, the audience erupted fully. Applause echoed across the hall, and the more they applauded, the more Trump's control slipped away. His face reddened. His gestures grew more frantic. He tried shouting over the crowd, but it only made him appear smaller. A man known for dominating attention was losing it rapidly. Cameras zoomed in, capturing his frustration, his forced expressions, every uneasy movement. Those watching at home were not only hearing Crockett, they were watching Trump lose composure. And she recognized it. She continued, sharper now, her confidence unmistakable. "Leadership," she said, "isn't about being the loudest. It's about staying steady. It's about lifting others up instead of pulling them down." Another powerful wave of applause broke out. Trump struck the podium and raised his voice, nearly shouting, but the applause drowned him out. The cameras turned to her. She had become the center of the room. She took control not through volume, but by holding her ground and staying composed. Then came the moment that changed everything. Trump, visibly frustrated, attempted one last time to regain control. His tone grew threatening as he issued warnings and accusations. But it was clear the room had turned. Those who once supported his lines now supported hers. He felt the shift, and he knew it. Then, in a surprising move, Trump stopped mid-sentence. His jaw tightened. His grip on the podium stiffened. He glared at Crockett, then at the crowd, and suddenly he turned and marched off stage. Gasps filled the hall. The president had walked out, unable to reclaim the control he once commanded. Cameras followed him, but the focus remained on Crockett. She had not only held her ground, she had turned the entire atmosphere against the most powerful man in the country. His usual confidence and showmanship had cracked, and Jasmine Crockett was the one who exposed the break. The crowd erupted again, this time in full celebration. People stood, clapping and cheering, and Jasmine remained at the center, steady and composed. Trump had expected this moment to be his. Instead, it became hers. And as the applause filled the room, one truth stood out. The night Trump believed he had silenced Jasmine Crockett was the night she spoke with her strongest voice. The room continued to tremble from everything that had unfolded.